Chapter 1. Awakening. The first hint of consciousness was the cold. Not the icy bite of winter, but the chill of lying naked on the grass. Oddly, though he felt it, it didn't bother him. He opened his eyes. The sky stretched above him, vast and gray, with clouds looming in the distance. He sat up slowly. His muscles felt strangely fresh, as if he'd slept deeply. He didn't remember how he'd gotten there. He didn't remember who he was. His mind was empty of names, faces, or familiar places. Yet he wasn't ignorant. He retained general knowledge, logic, and reason. He understood hunger, danger, civilization. He knew of swords, kingdoms, coins. He knew mathematics, physics, computers, and airplanes. But he remembered nothing else, except one thing. He had lived, and died. Beside him, a leather pouch rested on the grass. Inside, he found a simple wool tunic, sandals, and a folded note. "You died, and you asked to be reborn in Westeros. I'm a fucking idiot," was his first thought. Game of Thrones was a universe where main characters died by the dozen. Still, he kept reading. "Your kind is no longer the same. You chose to become a progenitor vampire, with the appearance of Alucard from Castlevania. To prevent you from slaughtering all of humanity, we've adjusted your mind to better handle stress. This is only a buffer. It doesn't stop you from feeling fear or doing stupid things, nor does it alter emotions like hatred or love. Your mind is your own. I'm explaining this because you asked for it, since you won't remember making this choice." "That does sound like me," he mused, though he couldn't explain why the logic felt familiar. By requesting rebirth as a vampire with almost no weaknesses, we had to balance it with missions and drawbacks. For details, tear this paper and think of the word system. A strange sensation washed over him. Not fear, nor excitement, acceptance. Somehow, he knew this had been his own choice, even if he didn't remember making it. He closed his eyes. Then, knowledge flooded his mind. An emerald hologram floated before his eyes. It displayed his name, still blank, his age, physical status, and a vague map of the area. It also listed a series of missions, each with a distinct goal. Status. Name. Assign. Current age. 18. Immortal. Height. 1.85 meters. Condition. Normal. Missions. Found a noble house. Become a titan of commerce. Forge a legend at sea. Assassinate a king. Leave an indelible mark on culture. Rule the 7 kingdoms. Unite a massive khalasar. Face the long night. Kill a noble from each of the 7 kingdoms. Eradicate slavery in Slaver's Bay. Unify or exterminate the mountain tribes. Restore the Night's Watch. Become a combat legend. Explore every important corner of the world. Win a tournament. Be knighted. Defeat Gregor Clegane in single combat. Drawbacks. Greedy eyes. Someone powerful will covet and seek to destroy you. Scattered gear. Your belongings were hidden, but the system will track them. Faceless man. A novice assassin will come for you. Items unknown location. Valyrian sword. Earring of Eros. Dragon egg. Valyrian spellbook. After reviewing it all, he could only smile. Why the hell not? He'd lived one life. He'd died. And now he had a second chance in a world that promised nothing but thrill. He could explore breathtaking landscapes, study magic, ride a fucking dragon. Sure, they'd try to kill him. For his drawbacks, or just some random thief. But almost no one in this world could do it. He was a vampire, immortal, and he knew this world's history. He could save Daenerys from being sold. Save Eddard Stark from execution. Murder Joffrey. Slay the Mountain. Or maybe just let it all burn while he sipped Dornish wine from the shadows. He was free. He pulled on the tunic and sandals, scanning the horizon. No roads. No signs of civilization. But if he wanted to survive, if he wanted to leave his mark on this world, the first step was simple. Move. Maximum effort, he thought with a grin. Chapter 2, First Blood. Anyone would think rebirth would be a terrifying experience, but whether due to the mental buffers they'd installed or simply sheer excitement, for him, it wasn't. Walking across an endless plain of untouched earth and grass helped him relax. With a clear mind, he took a moment to assess his situation. First, he had no name. He needed one. Who would have thought? Not every day you get to choose your name from scratch. As he kept walking, he felt the breeze on his face. He examined his hands, large, masculine, with strong, robust arms. Muscular. He felt powerful. He also had basic sword training, likely one of the perks he'd chosen. He knew how to move, had good footwork, and an instinctive grasp of his new abilities. He smiled when, after stopping to focus, his surroundings suddenly shifted. The sky darkened, and everything around him took on a gloomy hue, except for one thing: living beings. He could see what looked like circulatory systems moving through the grass, beneath the soil, in the birds overhead. It was incredible, intoxicating. He looked up and spotted an eagle circling above. Then he remembered. A dragon egg was among his belongings. One that would belong to him. He could fly. Though his powers let him float or transform into a bat or wolf, he couldn't travel very fast or high. Not a problem, he had all the time in the world. But every man had dreamed of riding a dragon. It was practically in their DNA. Dragon, he murmured. Alucard's original family, curiously, had ties to dragons. His father was Vlad Dracula, son of the dragon. A man who loved so fiercely he burned the world to avenge his wife. That, he respected. He knew that even if he lived centuries and lay with thousands of women, he'd only ever love one. And when that happened, he'd let the world burn for her. In honor of the man who fathered this body, in honor of the man who lived, killed, and died for love, I'll name myself Vlad Dracul. Instantly, his name updated in the system. He felt the weight of the moment. Just as he savored his new name, a sound in the distance caught his attention. Horses and men, over half a kilometer away. Vlad could only smile. His heightened senses were a marvel. The clatter of hooves rang clearly across the plain. He stood still, eyes fixed on the dust cloud rising on the horizon. Soon, he made them out. Sun-darkened men clad in leather and light fabrics, braided hair falling down their backs. Dothraki, at least a dozen, advancing in loose formation. They weren't charging yet, but they rode with confidence. They'd seen him. Vlad didn't move. He knew how Dothraki operated. So he sighed. Less than a day in this world, and already he'd have to kill. The first rider halted his horse a few meters away. A tall, muscular man, bare-chested with scars crisscrossing his skin. A curved arak hung at his hip, a sneer on his lips. The others encircled him, forming a loose ring. The leader studied him, then spat. Vlad was tall, lean, and unnaturally pale, with sharp features that might have been handsome if not for the glacial aura around him. His silver hair, long, straight as silk, cascaded over his broad shoulders. His near-aristocratic bearing clashed wildly with his simple tunic and sandals. You are a man without a khalasar. Alone. Look at that hair, that white skin, a bed slave, surely, the leader said in a guttural tongue. The others laughed. Vlad tilted his head slightly, not understanding the words but weighing whether to kill them. Not a trace of fear showed on his face. The leader frowned. All men without a khalasar are slaves, he insisted. Fight or run. If you run, you'll be our slave. If you fight, he bared his teeth, you'll still be our slave. He spoke again, but Vlad didn't comprehend. We can avoid this, Vlad said calmly. The Dothraki exchanged confused glances at his foreign speech. Then, as if rehearsed, they drew their araks in unison. Can't be avoided, Vlad sighed. The leader struck first. His horse surged forward, arak slicing toward Vlad's neck. Vlad sidestepped. The blade whistled through empty air. The rider wheeled his mount around. The others didn't wait. A second arak swung down. Vlad caught it barehanded. The Dothraki yelled as his weapon froze midair. With a sharp tug, Vlad yanked him from his saddle and slammed him into the dirt. Silence. For a moment, the riders hesitated. Vlad watched them, expression serene. The leader cursed and barked in order. With a war cry, the Dothraki charged as one. Vlad smiled. His first battle in this world, and he wanted to test himself. The first attacker swung diagonally. Too slow. Vlad dissolved into mist. The blade cut nothing. The rider blinked, baffled, just as Vlad rematerialized behind him. A precise strike to the nape dropped him unconscious before he hit the ground. Another Dothraki thrust a spear. Vlad pivoted, snapping the shaft mid-motion. He grabbed the warrior by the throat and hurled him into his own horse like a battering ram. He moved among them like a shadow, inhumanly fast, lethally precise. An arak flew. Vlad was already elsewhere. A fist shattered ribs. A kick toppled a horse. He didn't kill, just disabled them, until only one remained. The leader. Vlad approached with the calm of a predator stalking prey. The Dothraki gripped his arak, knuckles white. He was afraid. Demon, he growled, voice thick with terror. Vlad only smiled. The leader roared, launching a final attack. Vlad waited until the last instant. Then, with impossible speed, he caught him midair by the throat. The horse galloped on. The rider didn't. The Dothraki kicked, clawing at Vlad's arm. Useless. Vlad's smile widened, fangs glinting. Sorry, but I need to learn your language. The leader spat at his face. Vlad dodged, disgusted. Actually, not that sorry. He tilted his head and sank his fangs into the man's neck. One of vampirism's many gifts, learning through blood. A single taste could extract essence, knowledge, memories, everything. The blood is lives, Dracula had once said. How right he was. The flavor of hot blood exploded in his mouth, intoxicating as the finest wine or rarest delicacy. Now he understood addicts. Luckily, the euphoria was controllable, like savoring an exquisite meal, not heroin's oblivion. The leader thrashed, cursing, until his body went limp. Vlad drank him dry. When he dropped the corpse, dust still hung in the air. Chapter 3, First Battle. He looked around. The others were still alive, unconscious, but breathing. Vlad paused to analyze. He had tested his strength, his speed, and the blood. Strangely, killing stirred nothing in him. No sadistic satisfaction, but no guilt either. The former would have been vulgar. The latter would have gotten him killed. He ran his tongue over his fangs, wiping the corners of his mouth with his thumb in an almost fastidious gesture. With his pristine white tunic and upright posture, any observer might have mistaken the scene for a noble dabbing his lips after dinner, not a vampire post-massacre. Then, knowledge erupted in his mind like a spring. The Dothraki language became as familiar as his mother tongue. The Iraq's movements, riding techniques, fragmented memories of the dead leader, all flooded his consciousness. A groan shattered the silence. The warriors were waking. When their eyes landed on their leader's corpse, their cries echoed across the plain, and this time, Vlad understood every word. He killed Naro. Let's gut the demon. Vlad twirled the Iraq deftly, sending droplets of blood arcing scarlet. The smile he gave them was glacial. Come, then, die like your friend, he said in flawless Dothraki, each syllable sharp as his blade's edge. The warriors froze. Their eyes, once blazing with fury, now dilated with primal terror. It was said Dothraki knew no fear, but Vlad was the exception that shattered all rules. And the most terrifying part, he didn't even seem winded. His clothes were unruffled, his breath steady. As if defeating 6 warriors had been nothing more than a morning stretch. Your friend was weak, Vlad continued, pointing the Iraq at them. But you might still be useful. Take me to your call. One of them, a young man with serpentine scars, snarled. We don't serve weak men. Vlad's smile widened, fangs glinting. Good, because I'm not a man, and I'm certainly not weak. The silence that followed was thick enough to carve. Finally, with stiff movements, the warriors sheathed their weapons. We'll take you to Khal Baro, muttered the oldest, avoiding his gaze. Vlad exhaled, cleaning the blood from his blade before stripping the fallen man of his hides and belt, arming himself with his gear. A glance at the system's map confirmed his suspicion. He was in the heart of the Dothraki Sea. For anyone else, it would have been a death sentence. For him, convenient. The Dothraki only understood the language of force. No noble masks or elaborate lies like in Bravos or Marine. Here, beheading the Khal would suffice to rule. He mounted the dead man's horse without ceremony. One warrior loaded the corpse onto his own steed, shooting furtive glances at the puncture wounds on the neck. Vlad ignored him, focusing on the horizon. The Dothraki Sea stretched endlessly, a golden plain rippling like an ocean under the wind. They rode in tight formation, the 5 remaining warriors flanking him like reluctant escorts. None spoke, but their tense stares betrayed their thoughts. No man defeats 6 Dothraki riders. No man trespasses alone into our lands and lives. And no man, ever, challenges a Khal without an army at his back. Luckily, Vlad wasn't a man. A vampire needed no armies. Just time, and an appetite. Who'd miss an entire Khalasar in this grass sea? He mused, though he dismissed the thought. For now, he needed to consolidate the stolen memories before they faded. The Khal wouldn't be a problem. Dothraki were predictable. A direct challenge, a few seconds of combat, and he'd have his new army. The camp sprawled for kilometers, a chaotic mass of tents, horses, and warriors. Thousands of Dothraki moved about, tending mounts, sharpening weapons, or feasting around roaring fires. At its center stood the largest tent, adorned with braided horsehair and banners. Vlad's eyes swept the camp, assessing warriors and defenses. One of his escorts dismounted and spoke rapidly to a guard at the entrance. The guard's gaze landed on Vlad, confusion and disbelief twisting his features. This pale Gascari comes to challenge the Khal, he jeered. The warrior at Vlad's left leaned in, whispering. He killed Naro. and defeated the others, without drawing his arak. The guard paled. Without another word, he turned and vanished into the tents. Vlad remained motionless on his horse, savoring the spreading chaos. Whispers swarmed. Outsider. Killer. Demon. The crowd pressed closer, some cursing, others nervously gripping weapons. Then, the great tent's hides parted. And Khal Barrow emerged, eyes burning with rage. Barrow was a mountain of muscle. Skin darkened by the sun. His thick, heavy braids swung with golden rings, each earned in battle. Scars carved stories across his face, and his dark eyes gleamed with arrogance. Behind him, his 3 blood riders watched silently, araks glinting in the dusk light. The Khal strode forward, boots kicking up dust as he scrutinized Vlad with disdain. "What is this?" he roared. "A foreign boy comes unarmed to my camp. Do you beg for your life or seek to die a fool's death?" Laughter erupted among the warriors. Dothraki knew no mercy, not even in mockery. Vlad dismounted calmly. Hundreds of eyes tracked him, waiting. Then he spoke. "I am Vlad Dracul." Silence fell like an axe. His voice, quiet yet weighted with authority, smothered the laughter. Every warrior sensed the danger radiating from him. He met Barrow's gaze and uttered words that split the air like steel. "I've come to kill you." For a moment, only the crackle of fires answered. Then Barrow barked a laugh. "You," he shouted. "A foreigner with no khalasar, no sword, nothing, dares challenge a call." His blood riders grinned, hands on their weapons, eager for blood. Vlad didn't flinch. "I need no army," he said. "Just a sharp blade." Murmurs spread like wildfire. Even for Dothraki, this was madness. Barrow's smile vanished. His pride had been wounded before his people. If he didn't respond, his authority would crumble. He had no choice. This insolence demanded death. He gripped his arak. "So eager to die," he growled, stepping forward. "Then I'll grant your wish." Vlad's smile was cold as the grave. "Come, Khal Barrow. Prove you deserve to be Khal." Chapter 4, Khal Vlad. The circle of warriors parted, forming an impromptu battlefield. Barrow unsheathed his arak, the curved blade glinting in the firelight. Vlad took the weapon from the warrior he'd killed earlier, moving with unsettling calm. A moment of stillness. Then Barrow struck. His blow would have split a common man in two, but Vlad sidestepped at the last instant. He countered immediately, his blade hissing through the air. Steel met steel. Barrow's eyes widened. Vlad retreated gracefully, as if in a dance, but the Khal didn't relent. He attacked again, this time aiming for Vlad's neck. Vlad blocked. Barrow's strength was immense, yet it didn't force the vampire back a single step. Vlad deflected the arak and struck. His blade carved a deep gash across Barrow's ribs before the Khal could react. The Dothraki held their breath. Now it was Vlad who advanced. His sword fell like lightning, but Barrow dodged and slashed at his gut. Vlad parried, driving his arak into the earth. Seizing the opening, he pivoted and cut with lethal speed. Barrow lost his balance, dropped his weapon, and rolled to avoid being cleaved in half. When he rose, the difference was clear. Vlad stood untouched, Barrow, bloodied and panting. Vlad picked up the arak and tossed it at his feet. "Pick it up. Let's finish this." Barrow glared, clenched his teeth, and charged again. His strikes were faster now, more desperate, but to Vlad, they were slow. Predictable. He evaded every cut and countered with precision. Within seconds, Barrow was on his knees, trembling, his braid drenched in blood. Vlad gazed down without pity. "You fought well." A swift motion, and the Khal's head tumbled free. Silence. Then the Dothraki roared. Vlad raised the severed braid. "Barrow has fallen. I am your Khal now." The horde's cry shook the night. Vlad stood over Barrow's corpse, his weapon still dripping. The air thrummed with tension. Though the 2,000 warriors seemed ready to follow, he knew what came next. The first rebels were already stepping forward. Barrow's 3 blood riders approached, fingers white on their araks, eyes burning with hate. Herrick, the eldest, a cruel warrior whose body bore scars from 100 battles and whose blade had reaped dozens of heads, spoke first. "You are not our Khal," he snarled. Beside him, Rokaro and Horko barely contained their fury. With a sneer, he spat at Vlad's feet. "You are nothing. Killing Barrow doesn't make you Khal. You are no lord of horses. No brother to the stallion." Vlad regarded him impassively, his voice cold as steel. "If you wish to join him in the grave, take one step forward." The 3 attacked without hesitation. Herrick struck first, his arak gleaming as it arced toward Vlad's skull, but the vampire ducked and retaliated with brutal efficiency, driving his blade into Herrick's side. Blood sprayed. Yet the other two were already upon him. Rokaro slashed from the left, his edge tracing a fatal crescent, while Horko lunged from the right, dagger aimed at Vlad's ribs. With lethal precision, Vlad spun. His blade flashed twice. The first strike severed Rokaro's hand at the wrist. The warrior howled as blood fountained from the stump. The second halted Horko's attack mid-motion. Vlad caught his wrist in an iron grip, bones crunching. Before the Dothraki could react, Vlad smashed an elbow into his face, shattering his nose with a wet crack. Herrick, despite his wound, roared and charged again, blind with rage. But fury made him clumsy. Vlad sidestepped effortlessly, and his weapon carved a perfect arc, cleaving Herrick's head from his shoulders in one stroke. The Bloodrider's body crumpled. In the silence that followed, Vlad ended Horko, driving his sword through the warrior's chest before the dazed, bleeding man could even look up. Rokaro, still clutching his mutilated wrist, tried to crawl away. Vlad reached him in 2 strides and opened his throat with a clean slash. The 3 Blood Riders lay dead, their corpses staining the earth crimson. Vlad stood unmoved, his breath steady, not a drop of sweat on his brow. His gaze swept the crowd, daring anyone else to oppose him. None did. The Dothraki revered strength above all. Killing a Khal was noteworthy, but slaughtering his 3 finest warriors in single combat. That was the stuff of legends. One by one, they began to chant, "Khal Vlad." The cry spread like wildfire, swelling through the camp until it became a thunderous roar. "Khal Vlad." They beat their chests, their voices shaking the night. They accepted him, for now. Vlad watched them, face unreadable. This was only the beginning. They followed, yes, but they didn't believe. Not truly. To win their souls, he needed more than a midnight brawl, he needed a war, a conquest they'd sing of for centuries. And he was determined to give it to them. Stepping forward, his voice cut through the cheers like a blade. "Tomorrow, we ride." The horde's cry shook the night once more. Chapter 5, Battle. Night stained the sky as Vlad entered what had once been Khal Baro's tent, now his own. The air smelled of aged leather and cold ashes, seeping into the thick fabric walls. The interior was warm and well appointed. Animal pelts covered the ground, while armor and gold ornaments glinted faintly in the corners. The bed was primitive but undoubtedly comfortable. At least his first night wouldn't be spent in squalor. Time passed swiftly. Vlad didn't need sleep, so he didn't. Instead, he strategized silently while eavesdropping on the Khalasar's murmurs. Outside, riders gathered around fires, devouring roasted meat and speaking in hushed tones. There was no celebration, not yet. He'd defeated Baro and taken his Khalasar, but Dothraki didn't give loyalty lightly. They'd follow, yes, but they hadn't fully accepted him. He laid his arax on a rough-hewn table and stripped off his travel-stained tunic. His eyes scanned the available arsenal. Curved arax, Dothraki spears, bone-handled daggers. But it was a longsword with a straight blade of dark steel that caught his attention. Not Dothraki made, likely tribute from some conquered city, and though it wasn't Valyrian steel, it was a worthy weapon. Thinking of Valyrian steel, Vlad unfurled his map. The items he'd brought into this rebirth were far away. Meereen was the nearest city, and his sword lay between Meereen and Yunkai, days of travel distant. First, he'd consolidate control over this Khalasar, then he'd march there for supplies, Valyrian-speaking slaves, and to reclaim what was his. He dressed in leather breeches, layered belts studded with gold, fastened the sword to his hip, and stepped outside. He wore no armor. Dothraki scorned it as the garb of cowards, but Vlad needed none. Common steel would struggle to pierce his skin, and if it did, he'd heal in seconds. Prepared, he moved with supernatural speed, leaving the camp behind in moments. At the nearest settlement marked on his map, he dissolved into mist to infiltrate undetected. He surveyed the terrain, the men, even the Khal's hut. Alarmingly easy. With the intelligence gathered, he returned swiftly. The horde awaited him, their troop leaders gathered around a great fire. Their faces were hard, their eyes wary. They didn't trust him. "We ride within hours," Vlad announced, shattering the silence with steel in his voice. "We'll take Xaro's Khalasar. We attack from 3 fronts. I'll lead the main charge myself." Some grunted approval, but others exchanged doubtful glances. Kavo, a man with scars crisscrossing his face, crossed his arms. "Xaro has twice our numbers," he objected skeptically, "and you'd split our strength further." Vlad held his gaze, cold as moonlit steel. "We don't need numbers. We need strategy. You'll only attack after I do, when they're already distracted by me." Most leaned in immediately, likely assuming arrogance. Vlad bent over the makeshift map where stones marked enemy positions. Xaro relies on his numbers, so he's grown careless. There's a hill east of his camp. If we circle wide, we can approach unseen until it's too late. He pointed to 3 strategic points around the enemy camp. 3 fronts. My group engages head-on as the distraction. When they're surrounded, the other 2 groups close the trap. Riders exchanged glances, some openly skeptical. And if they detect us early? Another asked. Vlad smiled in a way that promised no comfort. They won't. He let silence hang before concluding. Believe me or not, but obey. And when Xaro falls within hours, you'll see I lead you to victory. A heavy quiet settled over the gathering. Finally, some nodded, not from loyalty, from fear. Fear of being the first to fall beneath his blade. Dawn painted the sky in scarlet and gold as the first Dothraki riders began to move. From atop a dusty hill, Vlad watched his Khalasar split into 3 fronts exactly as ordered. The air thrummed with tension, warriors' murmurs, horses' whinnies, and the clatter of weapons forming a symphony of war across the plains. Ahead, Xaro's Khalasar massed like a gathering storm. They hadn't expected an attack, but it hardly mattered. Dothraki needed no elaborate preparations, mounting their steeds and drawing steel was enough. They outnumbered Vlad's forces nearly 2 to 1, but he didn't need numbers, only perfect timing. He turned to his own group, the central contingent of his strongest warriors, for now. Some watched him with respect, others with doubt. They knew this would be a bloodbath, and that their leader planned to spearhead the charge, at least that much they could respect. Without hesitation, Vlad signaled the flanking groups to encircle the enemy. Then he inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of impending battle settle over him. Chapter 6, Bloodbath. Forward, his voice thundered, dragging with it the fate of all who followed. A massive dust cloud rose as hoofs struck the earth with storm-like force. The war cries of the riders rose with the wind as Xaro's men prepared for the clash, forming a wall of steel and muscle. And then, impact. Vlad and his warriors tore through enemy lines like a spear plunging into flesh, splitting their formation with the brutality of a steel tide. Araks rose and fell, horses screamed in panic as their riders were dragged down, and the shrieks of dying men blended with the clamor of battle. Vlad cut without pause, his sword carving arcs of death that reaped lives in the blink of an eye. A Dothraki charged at him, Arak raised high to cleave him in 2, but Vlad barely twisted his wrist, and his sword plunged through the warrior's throat, severing his spine before the corpse hit the ground. Another took his place instantly, leaping from his mount with a spear leveled. A mistake. Vlad leaned aside, the blade passing over his shoulder as his own sword rose in a clean slash, bisecting the attacker midair, splitting torso from legs in one perfect cut before both halves crashed onto blood-soaked earth. Enemies kept coming. For every man who fell, 3 took his place, but Vlad didn't stop. He felt the air shift behind him and, without turning, tilted just in time to evade a blade aimed at his back. The sword grazed his shoulder, and in a flash of steel, Vlad seized the attacker's arm, snapping it with a twist before driving his blade through the man's gut, impaling him clean through. He kept riding, kept killing. 5 riders encircled him, trying to pin him down. One raised a mace, another lashed out with a rope, while a third aimed for his horse. Vlad destroyed them as easily as a man brushes aside undergrowth. His sword descended with fury, splitting the rope wielder in 2 with such force that his organs spilled out before his corpse did. The second man barely registered his mace being deflected before Vlad's blade speared through his abdomen, lifting him off the ground from sheer impact, his scream drowning in the blood gushing from his mouth. The third never got to strike. Vlad kicked his mount forward, and the horse trampled the man beneath its hooves with a wet crunch, his skull bursting like ripe fruit. And then the blood coating everything, drenching him, mixing with sweat, saturating the air with its intoxicating metallic tang. Every slash opened flesh, every strike shattered bone, every twist of his sword sent limbs flying as enemy cries of terror rose above the din. Demon, a rider screamed before being cleft in half. Around him, his own men fell or faltered, overwhelmed by numbers, but Vlad didn't need them. He stood unwavering atop his mount, sword slick with gore, hair plastered to his face, chest rising and falling with deep breaths as the battlefield moved in slow motion for him. He felt it all, the pulse of war in his veins, the drunken euphoria of slaughter empowering him. He wasn't human, he never had been. 2 riders attacked from opposite sides, Araks poised to take his head. Vlad dropped his reins, leaning left to evade the first strike, and in one motion, drove his sword through one man's ribcage with such force that the blade shot out the other side to embed itself in the second's neck, shearing through halfway in a spray of hot blood. The men surrounding him began to hesitate. This wasn't normal. The Dothraki were fierce warriors, but this was different. This man didn't tire, didn't falter, didn't seem human. His face was masked in blood, his armor blackened by carnage, his sword humming with each kill as if it were an extension of his body. And then, the tide turned. From the flanks, his men arrived, closing the noose around Xaro's warriors. The trap was sprung. The enemies, surrounded, realized too late their fate had been sealed the moment Vlad gave the order. But one obstacle remained. Amid the chaos, Khal Xaro still stood, his arak dripping blood as he dismounted another foe with a single slash. Barely scratched, his rage was palpable as he locked eyes with Vlad and spurred his horse forward. Vlad smiled. "Xaro!" he roared, challenging him before them all. For an instant, the battlefield seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a cruel grin, Khal Xaro raised his arak and charged. Chapter 7, Victory. What followed the initial skirmish was, in truth, rather anticlimactic. Anyone might have expected Xaro to put up a prolonged and dangerous fight, but his opponent was Vlad. The moment Xaro was within reach, Vlad deflected his thrust with surgical precision and, without hesitation, drove his sword through the man's throat. Quick, clinical, Xaro collapsed, soon followed by his two remaining blood riders. When Vlad raised the Khal's severed head, the surviving warriors surrendered almost immediately, though not before Vlad cut down a few more to drive the point home. Where his men had once regarded him with mere respect, they now watched him with that unique blend of terror and awe only the Dothraki reserve for a worthy leader. After tallying casualties and relocating the Khalasar along with anything of value, Vlad found himself commanding 7,000 people, 5,000 of whom were warriors. Beyond the military boost, the spoils proved generous, including one particularly gratifying surprise, a Valyrian steel dagger. A happy coincidence, indeed. Naturally, Vlad tested it on his own skin immediately, discovering that while Valyrian steel could cut him effortlessly, it didn't hinder his regeneration or cause any other ill effects. This pleased him more than he'd admit. After all, discovering fewer ways to die was always good news. Commanding a Dothraki horde was no easy feat. They were barbarians in every sense, and it took weeks to drill basic hygiene into them. He insisted they boil water before drinking and wash daily to avoid disease, though to enforce compliance, he eventually claimed these rituals warded off evil spirits. Only then did they obey without protest. Speaking of spirits, they now called him the Red Stallion. The image of his silhouette drenched in blood during battle had left an indelible mark. His warriors followed him with near mystical reverence, and few remained foolhardy enough to challenge him. Even among the enslaved women, his reputation spread. Many competed to share his bed, as if it might grant them some divine blessing. Unfortunately for them, Vlad had standards. Hygiene, appearance, even lineage, why not? He had the bearing of a prince and the body of a warrior. Over the next year, Vlad consolidated his hold on the Dothraki Sea with brutal efficiency. He didn't rest on his first conquest. He led his growing Khalasar into 4 more clashes, each against larger forces. His tactics became legend. Devastating swift attacks, relentless flanking maneuvers, and in every battle, the sight of his blood-soaked figure carving through the fray like an unstoppable force. The first to fall was Khal Roko, a veteran leader with disciplined but predictable troops. Vlad shattered their formation using the same pincer tactic he'd employed against Xaro. When Roko tried to flee, Vlad split his chest open mid-gallop. 5,000 riders joined his horde. Next came Khal Vejo, younger and shrewder, but still outmatched. Vejo avoided direct confrontation, relying on ambushes and hit-and-run strikes. It didn't matter. Vlad hunted him patiently, herding his Khalasar toward a riverbank with no escape. Their duel lasted barely a breath before Vlad pierced his heart. 6,000 more warriors swore fealty. The third battle was against Khal Joro, famed for his riders' speed and hit-and-run tactics. He thought he could exhaust Vlad. He underestimated both the vampire's stamina and his army's discipline. After a week of skirmishes, Vlad forced a pitched battle on open plains, where speed meant nothing. The slaughter was merciless. 7,000 more joined his ranks. The final, and hardest, fight was against Khal Hargo, a seasoned leader with a horde nearly as large as Vlad's. Hargo ambushed him with hidden forces in the hills, the first time Vlad had ever been pushed to survive rather than dominate. He used his inhuman strength to breach enemy lines, buying time for his men to regroup. In the end, Hargo fell like the others, and 10,000 riders bent the knee to the Red Stallion. By then, Vlad no longer led a Khalasar, he commanded an army. 28,000 Dothraki warriors swore loyalty, along with their families, slaves, and herds. Yet he knew his rule wasn't secure. Expanding too fast without consolidation invited betrayal, and if there was one thing he understood about the Dothraki, it was that their allegiance hinged on fear and strength. For now, he'd avoid challenging Khal Drogo or the other great Khals. Instead, he focused on forging his horde into a well-oiled machine. This brought him to Meereen, where trade and supplies were secondary to a far greater prize. 2 Valyrian slave girls, Alyssa and Mara, fluent in the city's language and customs. They became his personal attendants, feeding him blood, tending his needs, and occasionally sharing his bed. Initially, Vlad had planned to drain them dry, but they were too pleasing to waste. Instead, he took small amounts over weeks, coaxing their compliance. Truthfully, the girls felt 2 things for him, fear and lust. When first told how he'd feed from them, they'd wept and begged for their lives. But once assured they'd survive, they acquiesced. They were slaves, after all. Luckily, his saliva numbed pain and sealed wounds instantly, not to mention the orgasmic shock it triggered. In time, they grew almost eager to donate. Not everything revolved around war and politics. At last, after months of searching, Vlad found what he coveted most, his Valyrian steel sword. Guided by his system's map, he unearthed a chest in a hidden Meereenese cave. Inside lay a masterpiece of Valyrian smithing, a broad, heavy blade with a dark edge that gleamed crimson in sunlight. The moment he gripped it, he knew, it was perfect. He named it, Scarlet Witch. Chapter 8, Gifts. The next step in his plan was, in essence, quite simple: gather a group of people with specific useful skills and turn them into his servants. The advantage of being a vampire with complete control over his nature was that he could create others without the usual drawbacks of his kind. The sun wouldn't reduce them to ashes, though it would weaken them slightly. They wouldn't lose control of their thirst, as they could sustain themselves on ordinary food, avoiding unnecessary massacres and unwanted rumors. But most importantly, Vlad would be the progenitor of his own bloodline, the first link in a new and powerful lineage. His abilities weren't those of some common vampire from legends. He wielded blood magic, could turn to mist or vanish from sight, shapeshift into various creatures, move with superhuman speed, and exert impossible strength. Yet his greatest advantage was the power to turn others and bind them to his will. Anyone who received his embrace would be tied to him forever. His new offspring would retain their minds, autonomy, and free will, to a degree, but an unshakable impulse would live within them, the need to obey him. No matter how they resisted, Vlad's will was law. Thus, his true plan took shape. Beyond conquest by force, beyond the brutal might of his horde, he would weave a hidden web of influence. Influential merchants, courtesans with connections, assassins, politicians, spies, he'd select them carefully, turn them, and scatter them across the world like seeds of his future empire. In time, his control would stretch beyond the Dothraki Sea, reaching the free cities, infiltrating Slaver's Bay, and eventually Braavos, even the Iron Bank itself. But before all that, there was a more urgent matter. Vlad needed information about the last Targaryens. And he knew exactly where to start. His arrival in Volantis marked the next phase of his expansion. Infiltrating the youngest daughter of Valyria posed no challenge. Vlad didn't storm the city with his Khalasar. He came alone, draped in a dark cloak and fine clothing, the night wind of Essos caressing his face. His army remained camped outside the walls along the Rhoyne, already negotiating with the city's rulers for compensation, the usual way free cities rid themselves of unwanted Dothraki. Volantis wasn't Meereen or Yunkai. It wasn't ruled by whips, but by an elite of nobles, the Tiger Party, backed by red priests and mercenary companies that kept the peace. Truthfully, the red priests piqued his curiosity. Before the Red Comet, they'd been little more than parlor magicians, but they truly held secrets of pyromancy and blood magic, knowledge Vlad would drink with pleasure. On his first night, he hunted 2 of them in the alleys near the pyramid. Their bodies were drained dry by the time he finished. Their blood burned with a strange heat, similar to what he'd tasted from his Valyrian slaves, but far more potent. Surely, it came from the magic in their veins. From them, he extracted useful information, mastery of new languages, and, most crucially, the location of Volantis's true library of magic, and of Kinvera, the High Priestess. She was a woman of high rank, influential, beautiful, and ambitious. If she was anything like Melisandre, she'd extended her life through magic and sacrifice. Vlad had no trouble capturing her in her own chambers. He moved faster than she could react, knocked her unconscious, and once she lay helpless, forced her to drink his blood before snapping her neck. What happened next was amusing. As expected, Kinvara was reborn with absolute loyalty to him. But this wasn't mere mind control. She remained her own person, keeping her fanatical devotion to the Lord of Light. Her mind, unable to reconcile the contradiction, reached an inevitable conclusion: Vlad was Azor Ahai reborn. Frankly, Vlad didn't care what she believed. He siphoned her knowledge of blood magic and pyromancy, then ordered minor reforms in the Red Faith. No more human sacrifices, more focus on aiding the people. He also tasked her with secretly converting the city's most influential nobles, securing his control. He imposed restrictions. She must restrain her thirst, feed only in private, and avoid suspicion. The beauty of being a progenitor was his telepathic link to his offspring. If Kinvara stepped out of line, he'd know instantly. With Volantis under his influence, Vlad departed. During a brief return to Marine, he found Belcaro, a slave trader with more gold than he could count and connections he never admitted publicly. Vlad didn't bother negotiating. He simply turned him. Under his new loyalty, Belcaro received clear orders. Find the Targaryens. Purchase dragon eggs at any cost. Expand Vlad's control through trade and shipping routes. One night, as Vlad walked Volantis's shadowed canals, he sensed a follower. No common spy, this one was trained, but too green. Compared to others, he moved like an elephant in a glass shop. Vlad didn't confront him, he simply led him into a dark alley. The young man took the bait. The attack was direct, a dagger aimed at his throat. Vlad barely moved. He caught the assassin by the neck, lifting him as if he weighed nothing. The boy struggled, but his strength was meaningless. Vlad studied him with curiosity, noting the shock on his face. "You're young to be a faceless man." A dry crack echoed through the alley as he snapped his neck. He dropped the body without a second glance. He knew what this was. According to his system, one of his rebirths' drawbacks was that a novice faceless man would eventually come for him. Had he been human, it might have been dangerous. But he wasn't human. Next, he sent his men to Westeros. He needed to confirm whether events followed the path he remembered or if his presence had altered fate. Thanks to his telepathic bonds, news would reach him swiftly. With that settled, he set sail for Braavos with two goals: infiltrate the Iron Bank and reclaim the dragon egg promised in his rebirth. According to his map, it lay hidden somewhere in the city's heart. It was time to claim it. Chapter 9, Preparations. The journey to Braavos was long but not exhausting. Vlad did not feel fatigue like a human, even if he went days without stopping. He crossed the narrow sea aboard a merchant ship hired in secret, avoiding unnecessary attention. During the voyage, the crew whispered about the latest rumors: a growing conflict in the Riverlands, Ironborn raids along the western coast, and, most interesting to him, the news of a man in the free cities paying fortunes for dragon eggs. That brought a smile to his face. Belcaro was doing his job well. One night, as the ship sailed through misty waters, Vlad sensed something unusual. A sailor shouted that he had seen a massive shadow gliding beneath the water. The men prayed to the sea gods, but Vlad only watched with curiosity. The creature was large, its movements fluid. Undoubtedly, a kraken. Vlad wondered if such beasts were magical, like dragons, or simply giant squids. Regardless of the answer, the kraken sank back into the darkness and did not reappear. By the time they finally arrived in Braavos, the sailors were still whispering tales of creatures in the mist. The Titan of Braavos loomed imposingly over the harbor's entrance, a colossal silhouette that seemed to watch every traveler daring to cross its domain. The structure was surprisingly solid and detailed, a masterpiece of engineering. Vlad did not recall its exact origins, but if it hadn't been built by the Valyrians, it was certainly a work worthy of admiration. He disembarked without drawing attention, wrapped in dark, elegant clothing, a cloak concealing his features. In Braavos, he would go unnoticed, just another shadow among merchants and travelers. He was in no hurry. The city was at his disposal. His first objective was to follow the directions on the map his system had provided and find his dragon egg. Though the comet had not yet crossed the skies and the world's magic remained dormant, his vampiric nature, combined with stolen knowledge of pyromancy and blood magic, gave him a unique advantage. Perhaps, with the right approach, he could make the egg hatch prematurely. A larger, stronger dragon always meant an advantage. The map led him to Braavos' underground aqueducts, a labyrinth of ancient tunnels running beneath the city. Vlad slipped through alleyways and descended through a hidden entrance behind a tavern in the fisherman's quarter. The air was damp, thick with the scent of stagnant water. He spent hours exploring, following the marked path. In a hidden chamber, he found a small treasure, chests filled with gold and jewels, forgotten riches of some overly cautious merchant or a noble who no longer existed. Vlad ignored them. His interest lay deeper, beyond a passage that had been blocked for centuries. With minimal effort, he cleared the debris and advanced into a dust and moss-covered hall. At its center rested a petrified dragon egg. He lifted it in his hands, feeling the rough texture of the hardened shell. It was heavier than it looked, its surface absorbing the torchlight, giving it an almost spectral glow. There were no signs of life, but that didn't matter. One day, he would awaken it. Over the following weeks, he focused on another objective, the Iron Bank. This was not an institution to be trifled with. Its vaults were deeper than any throne, and its influence stretched far beyond Bravos. Vlad requested an audience with one of its high-ranking representatives under the pretense of discussing a loan for future campaigns in Essos. He had no intention of incurring debt, but the meeting would allow him to evaluate potential candidates for a more permanent purpose. The encounter took place in one of the bank's opulent halls, a space where marble and gold spoke louder than any heraldry. The man who received him was slender, with graying hair and eyes as cold as steel. His expression remained impassive, but Vlad caught the brief spark of surprise in his gaze. Clearly, he had not expected the infamous Red Stallion to be like this. The bank does not usually lend to Dothraki, the man said in a measured tone, studying him with curiosity. Vlad smiled faintly. The Dothraki do not usually request loans. I, however, am no ordinary Dothraki. They exchanged words about investments, campaigns, and financial returns, though it was all a game of appearances. The truly important moment came when Vlad casually mentioned his interest in the last descendants of House Targaryen. The banker revealed little, but Vlad noticed the flicker of suspicion in his eyes. Though he lacked the dynasty's signature purple eyes, his appearance could easily pass for a distant relative. Yet the man asked no unnecessary questions. Instead, he offered the bank's vast network to track information, for a price. Vlad smiled slightly. He liked this man. It was almost certain he would soon grant him the embrace. Months passed, and Vlad returned to his Khalasar. He had his dragon egg, nearly 30,000 men under his command, and only 2 more things left to recover, a magical pendant and a book containing the most documented Valyrian magic. These would be the key pieces to cement his empire, and both were in Pentos. Luckily, according to the current timeline, Daenerys and her fool of a brother were also in Pentos. It was the perfect opportunity to approach someone who could give him a crucial advantage in this world. Besides, he remembered that Illyrio possessed 3 dragon eggs. However, commanding a Dothraki horde was not without its challenges. When he forbade rape, several men attempted to rebel, as if such a despicable act were fundamental to their culture. Vlad knew he had to set an example, and using Dracula's management manual, he opted for the old tactic of impalement. 7,000 impaled men were enough to make his Khalasar understand that his orders were not to be questioned. They also earned him the name, the Impaler, which brought him a satisfied smile. The rest of the journey was quieter. The cities they passed through offered enough tribute to keep the horde fed and well supplied, avoiding unnecessary bloodshed. When they neared Pentos, Vlad left the camp in the hands of 2 of his new blood riders, men he had given the embrace, who served him with absolute devotion. He rode toward Pentos accompanied by 3 of his blood riders and only 100 more Dothraki, enough to command respect without seeming like an invasion. I don't care if you fuck every whore in Pentos, but if any of you rape a woman, I'll impale you from head to ass. Understood, he said, his eyes glowing red in the dim light. Though fear did a good job of controlling the horse lords, it was best to remind them constantly. You, Charon and Talon, come with me. Seek an audience with Illyrio Mopatis while I search for something in this city. Be polite and don't cause trouble, understood? Yes, blood of my blood, the 2 replied reverently. Once he recovered all the treasures, it would be time to speak with the last Targaryen. Chapter 10, Meeting. Retrieving everything was an easy task. As he already knew, it would all be hidden, and no one could find or steal it before him. Eros, pendant was a magical artifact that granted absolute control over reproductive abilities, as well as ensuring safe childbirth. Vlad understood why he had chosen such an artifact. As a vampire, having natural offspring was incredibly difficult, it might take him centuries to achieve it. The pendant solved that problem at its root, making him as fertile as any human. As for the Book of Magic, it was a complete compendium on the magic used by Valyria to build its empire. From blood magic to the methods for crafting Valyrian stone, an extremely durable and resilient construction material used to erect their colossal towers. It also contained techniques for taming dragons and hatching their eggs. Though it only covered the basics, the knowledge within that book would give him a considerable advantage. In time, he could delve deeper into each branch of magic. When he returned to his men, Talon informed him that Illyrio had agreed to a meeting the following day. Vlad smiled, satisfied. Truthfully, with the power he now possessed, Illyrio might even try to arrange a marriage between Daenerys and him. That would grant the heir to the Seven Kingdoms 3 dragon eggs, and a legitimate reason to kill Viserys. If the man came even slightly close to the fool portrayed in the original timeline, failing to kiss his ass, he would take it as an offense and do something stupid, like threatening Vlad or Daenerys. That would give Vlad the perfect excuse to crown him with fire and blood. The next day, Vlad prepared to meet Illyrio. He wore a dark cloak woven with golden threads and black silk clothing with red accents. His appearance was impeccable, exuding refined elegance, something that always stood out in his public appearances. The Blood Riders, for their part, had also improved their aesthetics. After receiving the embrace, each new drop of blood granted them knowledge and perspective. They understood that, more than warriors, they had looked like beggars. Now, though they still wore no armor, their leather garments were finely crafted, adorned with gold and ornamental belts. Their beards were meticulously groomed and decorated, proving they were no longer mere barbarians. When they arrived at Illyrio's mansion, the place was opulently decorated, as expected. The grand house was filled with marble statues and tapestries depicting historical scenes from Essos. The walls were adorned with rare artifacts from all over the world, from ancient shields to priceless jewels. In the courtyard, a crystal-clear fountain reflected sunlight, casting golden glimmers that illuminated the surrounding figures. It was a reflection of the power and wealth Illyrio had amassed over his lifetime. Illyrio Mopatis received him in one of his most private chambers, where stone walls and large windows let in light while the fresh Pentoshi air drifted in. Gently. The man before Vlad was stout, with a protruding belly beneath his lavish robes and a short beard framing his wrinkled face. His gaze was accompanied by a friendly smile. "Welcome, Khal," Illyrio said, inclining his head slightly, showing more cordiality than Vlad had anticipated. "It is an honor to host the Red Stallion in my humble home." Vlad smiled politely, his composure unwavering. "No need for such formality, Illyrio," he replied, his tone relaxed and amicable. "You know well I'm no Dothraki by birth. I won't throw a fit if you don't treat me with reverence." He extended his hand in greeting. "My name is Vlad Dracul. You may simply call me Vlad." They drank wine as they spoke of Vlad's journey. Illyrio was intrigued by the story Vlad had fabricated for himself. Waking up in the Dothraki Sea with a blow to the head and no memories, fending off Dothraki riders who tried to capture him, then challenging their call and winning his Khalasar. Every detail was carefully crafted to make Vlad seem more approachable and less barbaric, a man of power with a believable past. The conversation continued for hours until Vlad finally broached the subject that truly interested him. "I've heard you acquired 3 dragon eggs," Vlad said, his gaze steady on Illyrio. "I want to buy them." For a moment, Illyrio fell silent, weighing Vlad's words. The air between them grew tense, and Vlad braced for the worst, but after a minute, Illyrio replied calmly. "Of course, it will sadden me to part with them, but gold will soothe that pain. They are quite expensive, you know." "Gold is no issue," Vlad smiled, pleased that negotiations were going smoothly so far. "Just what I like to hear," Illyrio laughed, his belly jiggling unsettlingly like a sphere of flesh and mirth. "They were brought from very far away. You're welcome to stay with me while we finalize the deal." Vlad smiled and nodded, pleased with the offer. "That sounds excellent. I'll just inform my men we'll be staying here a while." Illyrio, observing Vlad's calm demeanor, added, "You came to my mansion without guards. Though I appreciate your trust, Essos is not safe. I'll send some Unsullied with you." Vlad raised an eyebrow, amused by the suggestion. "Thank you once more," he replied, rising from his seat. With a wave of his hand, he bid Illyrio farewell and headed to his men, now accompanied by a dozen Unsullied sent for their protection. Vlad spent several days in Illyrio's mansion. More than once, he caught himself thinking, "This place really makes me forget all the shit I have to deal with," chuckling to himself as he gazed from the balcony. The room assigned to him was luxurious. Compared to Dothraki camps, it was like a 5-star hotel. Everything was comfortable, every detail oozed wealth and refinement. And though he enjoyed his stay, he knew he couldn't afford to let his guard down. Can someone tell me what the hell power stones are for? I have no idea. Chapter 11, The Missions. But all good things must come to an end. Sometime after his arrival in Pentos, one of his progenies in Westeros sent him a telepathic message with troubling, though not unexpected, news. Jon Arryn was dead, just as in the original timeline, and King Robert was trying to convince Eddard Stark to become his new hand. Tywin Lannister would not get the position even if he desired it, and Ned, of course, could still refuse. But Vlad considered the chances of the most honorable man in the north turning it down to be practically zero. If everything continued as it had before, his death was all but guaranteed. Vlad was still debating whether to intervene. In the show, Ned was one of the characters he would have liked to save, but here, in this real world, he might become a burden. He had no trouble imagining Stark leading a faction against the vampires if he ever discovered Vlad's nature, simply because they are beasts who feed on human blood. "Should I do something, my lord?" asked Rolland, a merchant whom Vlad had turned and sent to Westeros precisely for situations like this. "Nothing for now. Any news from the Iron Islands?" asked Vlad, sipping from a goblet of wine. "Nothing yet, my lord." "Very well, I'll focus on the eggs for now. I want you to send some spies to Dragonstone. Perhaps we'll find more." "As you command, my lord." Setting the goblet aside, Vlad turned his attention to the current situation. If he truly wanted to fulfill his objectives, the best way to do so would be through conquest. Essos was relatively simple. Daenerys had done it with her dragons and the Dothraki, though her greatest problem was that she didn't know how to rule or manage the economy of her domains. Vlad, on the other hand, had the advantage of having progeny in almost every major city in Essos. He could delegate the administration of conquered territories and focus on his true goals. The breaker of chains mission was problematic. The economy of Essos relied heavily on slavery, but the solution wasn't too complicated. With a bit of capitalist spirit, instead of slaves, he would employ the same workers for a miserable wage, just enough to feed themselves and pay for their own lodging, probably to their former masters. They wouldn't be slaves, just exploited workers. The difference was minimal, but enough to fulfill the mission. The rest of his missions could also be completed without excessive bloodshed, as long as he was clever enough. Establish a noble house. Become a trade titan. Forge a legend at sea. Assassinate a king. Leave an indelible mark on culture. Rule the 7 kingdoms. Unite a massive khalasar. Face the long night. Eliminate nobles from each of the 7 kingdoms. Eradicate slavery in Slaver's Bay. Unite or wipe out the mountain clans. Restore the Night's Watch. Become a legend in combat. Explore every important corner of the world. Rise as a tournament champion. Be knighted. Defeat Gregor Clegane in single combat. Being honest with himself, Vlad admitted that war didn't particularly appeal to him, but it was necessary. If he wanted to avoid the long night, he had to unify practically the entire continent. If he didn't, Westeros would fall, followed by Essos, and though he could turn people into his subjects, unless he corrupted hundreds of nobles and rulers, there would always be someone willing to act in their own self-interest, even if it meant condemning the world. He could stay in the sea of grass and watch events unfold, but sooner or later, war would come to him. Better to fight on his own terms. Besides, his missions would be easier to complete if he controlled both continents. He still lacked resources and military power, but Essos was full of possibilities. It was only a matter of choosing the right pieces. The Unsullied, the Dragons, the Second Sons, the Golden Company, there were many options to take control of Essos and, eventually, the 7 kingdoms. "How's the day treating you, Lord Dracul?" asked Illyrio, stepping into the room assigned to him. Vlad, who had been observing the city from the balcony, turned with a calm expression. "So far, so good. Nothing to worry about." It had been nearly 2 weeks since his arrival in Pentos, and he had yet to see the Targaryens. "I see," said Illyrio, studying Vlad's inhumanly beautiful appearance as the sunlight lit his face. "So, Magister, was there any particular reason you wished to see me?" asked Vlad, watching him closely. Illyrio smiled with satisfaction. "I wanted to inform you that my contact for the eggs will arrive in 3 weeks. "Splendid. Then I'll abuse your hospitality a little longer," replied Vlad with a smile. Meanwhile, in another wing of the mansion, the Targaryen siblings were discussing their enigmatic guest. It had been 2 weeks since Vlad Dracul's arrival. Magister Illyrio was making sure they didn't cross paths until he could determine whether Vlad could be an ally. Daenerys knew almost nothing about him. Only that he was roughly her age and had started as a nobody. Then he had challenged a Khal and built one of the largest Khalasars in Essos, earning infamous nicknames like the Red Stallion and the Impaler. So far, they had been kept away from his wing of the mansion. Viserys, of course, didn't understand why they needed to hide. That Dothraki savage should kneel before me and swear loyalty the moment he sees me. It is his duty, he said with irritation. Daenerys sighed. Do you think he'll help us? Magister Illyrio will make sure he's trustworthy, Viserys replied indifferently, not even looking at her. But it doesn't matter. Soon, he will kneel before the dragon. No one must wake the dragon. It was a phrase Viserys had burned into her soul since she was a child. Chapter 12, The Dowry. This chapter was originally called, The Spider. In reality, most of the Pentos arc was basically me using chapters from a fanfic titled, Game of Thrones, The Proud, as a template. When I started the story, I didn't plan on publishing it, so I didn't care where the words came from as long as they expressed my idea. Now that I've progressed, I feel the need to rewrite the scenes to make them absolutely my own. But don't worry, the plot won't change much, as it still follows the series pretty closely. Thank you all for your readings and understanding about this. Today, like any other day, Vlad found himself walking through Illyrio's garden, wondering how things would end. It had already been a month since the Magister had told him that his contact with the eggs would arrive in 15 days, but they still hadn't shown up. By this point, the novelty of being in Pentos had already worn off. A servant approached with a message. My lord, Magister Illyrio has called for you. Lead the way, he said calmly. The smell of the room where the Magister was thick. The incense filled the air with sweet spices and heavy oils. Vlad guessed that for anyone else it would be pleasant, for him, it was barely a nuisance. He walked forward with steady steps, wearing tight leather pants and a white silk shirt he had personally bought at the markets. Although he was a Dothraki Khal, he didn't intend to dress like one. It could cause tensions among his people, but when all the men present fear you, they rarely dare to question you. Moreover, he respected several of their customs. He wouldn't cut his hair unless he was defeated. He didn't wear armor in combat. Perhaps this selective appreciation of traditions kept the mouths shut that murmured about his hygiene and overly polished appearance. His cold, golden eyes landed on the Magister, seated as usual with a diplomatic smile, wrapped in costly fabrics and artificial elegance. Great Khal, greeted Illyrio, with a bow and a soft, measured voice. Speak, Magister. You've kept me waiting too long. Get to the point, Vlad replied, sharply, more polite than a common Dothraki, yes, but with no patience for unnecessary theatrics. Illyrio seemed more nervous than usual. He searched for the right words to say carefully. There have been complications, Great Khal. I'm afraid the eggs are no longer available for sale. Vlad didn't respond. He looked at him in silence, his eyes fixed like daggers. Though the revelation took him by surprise, he immediately knew it was a stratagem. A clumsy move, too. And dangerous. I think you've misunderstood me, Vlad said calmly, taking a glass of wine from the table. When we met, I made it clear that I am not a Dothraki like the others. You don't have to speak to me with so much respect, nor with such caution. And I suppose that's why you misunderstood me. Illyrio turned pale immediately, caught between sweat and fear. Great Khal, he didn't get to finish. Vlad stood up, and with a single leap, he placed himself on the table. Before the Magister could react, he lifted him into the air as if he weighed no more than a wet tunic. Illyrio's huge body squirmed in his hands, unable to do anything. Do you think that because I have manners, I am an easy target? Do you really think I conquered a Khalasar of 30,000 men by letting little men like you disrespect me? Do you think I will allow you to play with my time? Do you think I'm stupid? Illyrio was livid, his lips turning purple. He could barely breathe, and the fear had him on the edge of passing out. He wasn't used to fearing for his life. Great Khal, he stammered, his voice strangled. Vlad let him go abruptly, dropping him hard onto the chair, which creaked under his weight. Then, as if nothing had happened, he returned to his seat and sat down with the same cold elegance he had arrived with. Now explain it to me, Magister. And pray that your explanation satisfies me. Because if it doesn't, I might burn your mansion to the ground. Not before leaving you impaled at its doors. Illyrio gasped, one trembling hand on his chest and the other gripping the edge of the chair. He took a moment to catch his breath before speaking, avoiding looking directly at Vlad. I admit that I have dishonored our agreement, Great call, he finally managed to say, his voice broken. But it hasn't been for pleasure, the eggs were delivered as part of a dowry. Vlad didn't respond immediately. He took a sip of wine and let it sit on his tongue for a few seconds before swallowing. His eyes remained fixed on the Magister, with no apparent anger. Dowry? He asked softly, as if the words seemed foreign to him. Yes, for a young princess, Illyrio added, regaining some of his composure, though his voice still wavered. Daenerys Targaryen. Vlad didn't move a muscle. He simply placed the glass on the table. I don't recognize that name, he lied in a neutral tone. Should I? She is the younger sister of King Viserys, the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. Illyrio spoke with more confidence. I have sworn to serve the ancient House Targaryen. I have always acted in their interests, and it was King Viserys who ordered the eggs to be given as part of his sister's dowry, in order to seal an alliance that will allow him to reclaim what was taken from him. And what does this have to do with me, Illyrio? Vlad asked without changing his tone. Or do you expect me to replace the suitor of this princess? Illyrio shook his head, though the nervous smile that appeared on his lips betrayed him. No, great call. The princess has not yet been delivered. And Viserys is looking for a powerful ally. Someone capable of providing him with an army. In exchange, he will offer his sister's hand. A heavy silence fell over the room. Vlad crossed one leg over the other and leaned slightly in his chair, as if evaluating whether it was worth keeping the Magister alive. So you expect me to marry this princess? He asked, with a hint of mockery in his voice. Great call, it's actually a very advantageous deal. You would get 3 dragon eggs and a princess, and all you would have to do is help the young king in his conquest. Imagine the prestige of being the first Khal to conquer lands in Westeros, Illyrio argued, in a more measured tone, trying to sound reasonable. Vlad barely gave him a glance before standing up again, causing a visible shiver in the Magister. I will return in 2 weeks, Illyrio. Then I will meet this princess. If her appearance satisfies me, I will accept your deal. If not, prepare for the consequences of having played with my time. Silence fell once again like a weight. Illyrio nodded, swallowing nervously. I'll make the arrangements. Without saying another word, Vlad left the mansion and went in search of his blood riders and the men he had brought with him. He had no doubt that he would end up marrying Daenerys. It was one of the easiest ways to access the throne. That she was probably one of the most beautiful women in the world was just the cherry on top. In this universe, Daenerys is 16, which makes her participation not disturbing, since Vlad is technically only 18.